So, after all this time and all this work building this huge complete project, it's now finally time to really deploy it to a web server and really share it with the world. So in this video, you will learn how to deploy a project onto Heroku. And the first thing that we actually need to do is to install Heroku on our computer. So let's just search for Heroku Node.js. Okay. And so here we basically have a getting started guide for Node.js with Heroku. Okay. Because you can host all kinds of apps on Heroku, like PHP or Ruby on Rails applications. So it doesn't only work for Node.js. And we will take a closer look at Heroku in a second. But for now, let's just start by installing this program here. So I'm in the setup part of this guide here. And so now please go ahead and install the installer for your platform, whether that's macOS, Windows, or Linux. Or in this case here, I guess it only works for Ubuntu. Or actually it says here that it's available for other Linux as well. Anyway, please go ahead and install the version that you need for your computer. And then in the meantime, while that is installing, go ahead and create a new account. So click here on sign up and then open up your free Heroku account. So yet another account that you need to create. So there really are a lot of different accounts that you needed to create in order to complete this project. But I guess that's just how modern web development works. Anyway, after you have your account created, let's take a quick look here at the Heroku website just to get an overview of what this platform is all about. So Heroku is this platform which makes it really easy and hassle-free to deploy your web applications. And again, they can use any language that you can imagine. So you see Node.js, Ruby on Rails, this one I guess is Go, or actually it's Java, or PHP, Python, this one is Go, right? And so all kinds of apps really run on Heroku. Okay, so let's see what they say here. And this is mostly just marketing talk, I guess. So nothing all too interesting here. But of course, you can take a look here at all these different menus. And actually, it is free to get started with Heroku on a really basic application. But of course, once you start to level that up, you're gonna have to start to pay, okay? But here the free version, as you can see, comes with all the core platform features. You can even add custom domains. But the only problem with it is that the application will basically sleep. So basically after 30 minutes of no one accessing the application. Okay, but anyway, you can take a look at all of this on your own. So let's now actually go back to our project here. And to get started with the deployment process, let's start by logging into Heroku on our command line. And that is going to work because of the installation that we just did. All right, let's give it some more space here, clean that up, and now write Heroku login. All right. So if your Heroku installation was successful, upon typing Heroku login, you should see this message here. Press any key to open up the browser. Okay, so just press really any key as it says, except the Q, because that will exit the app. And so that is then going to open up a window for you where you can log in. And after that, just like magic, you will be logged in on Heroku in your command line. So it should probably take a bit. And sometimes it doesn't even work on the first try. So actually that happened to me before. And so just hit Control-C. Okay. And so on the Mac, that really is Control-C, not Command-C. And let's try that again. Press any key, go back to the browser, log in again. Go back again, and so then that's done. So you see, now I'm logged in with my email address. So again, this was not the first time. It didn't work for me on the first time. And so if that happened to you, then just do it exactly the way I did it here. Anyway, now with this, we are logged into Heroku here in our console. And so we should now be able to create a new project. Okay. Now, before doing that, we actually need to change something in our npm package.json file. So this one. And that's because Heroku actually uses our start command here to start up our application. Now, in production, we do not want to use nodemon here, right? We simply want to run our application using the node command and not nodemon, because that one is really only for development. And so let's change that. And I will duplicate this line, and I will call this one dev, and then the start one will only be node. All right? So again, in your package.json, you should always have this start script like this. So the node command, and then your entry point. Now what's also important for Heroku is that you specify these engines here, okay? And so we did that before, I think because some package, or actually because ESLint required it to work properly. But if we hadn't set it back then, well, then we would need to really set it at this point, okay? Now, since we changed this file now, we need to commit these changes to our repository. So let's git add package.json here, and then git commit. And then with a useful commit message. All right. Now, another thing that's really important when you deploy an application to Heroku is that you listen to the port at process.env.port. So right here in the server, we actually do that down here. Okay, so we specify the port variable as process.env.port. And so again, on Heroku, that's absolutely mandatory because otherwise it will not work at all. So if here, for example, we just specified some random port like 3000 here, then that would really not work. Okay, and that's because behind the scenes, Heroku will actually assign a random port to this environment variable. But a bit more about that in a second. Because now we are really ready to do the actual deployment. And to do that, we create a brand new Heroku project in our project folder. So make sure that you really are in your root folder. And then once you're sure you're there and you're logged into Heroku, which we did before, you can then write Heroku create. And this will then create a new app, basically, with a completely random name. So in my case, that's Radiant Springs and then this number. But your application will, of course, have a completely different name. Now, what this did was to actually create a new remote branch in our Git repository. And this branch is called Heroku. So remember how before, in one of the previous lectures, we added a remote branch pointing to GitHub. And that branch was called origin, right? And so then we pushed our code to that remote branch using git push origin master. So like this. Remember that? And so now, as I mentioned, we have a new remote branch here, which is called Heroku. And so really the process of deploying our application is as simple as pushing our code to that remote branch. So git push Heroku master. And it really needs to be the master branch. It is the only branch for which this deployment works. Okay? But in our case, as you see here, we are actually in our master branch. And you can also see it down here in the corner of VS Code. Okay? And so that's no problem. So let's now run this command, which should then take a couple of time because of course it will upload all your files that are in the repository up to Heroku. And now you see all of this process here going on. And so what this is doing is that it's actually installing all dependencies here in our new application. So in our application that is now on Heroku. All right. So let's wait until all of this is done, and I'll see you back when this process has finished. Okay, and so that's done. So I hope you got the message, verifying deploy done. So you see launching, and so it really means that our application is now deployed to Heroku onto this URL. So you see the build succeed, and Yeah, really all these messages that I already talked about before. And so now in order to open up our application, all we need to write is Heroku open. Now we don't expect this to work just yet because all of our environment variables are actually not defined, right? Because we did exclude this configuration file here from our Git repository, okay? But still, just for the fun of it, let's actually try to open our application. And so, indeed, that opens up our URL, in this case at radiansprings848.herokuapp.com. So basically, it's this subdomain of Heroku. And so again, as expected, we actually got some error here. And once more, that's because our environment variables are at this point not yet defined. Now we can also take a look at these errors in the Heroku logs. So let me show you that as well. So Heroku logs --tail. So here you see state changed from starting to crashed. So let's see what we have here. Now actually you see the error message that we created ourselves here. So uncaught exception with this emoji and then shutting down. And you see here, cannot read property replace of undefined. And so again, that's because the environment variables are not defined at this point. So let's exit these logs here, again with Control-C. All right. And so now let's actually define these environment variables in order to make our application work. And the way we do that is to specify each environment variable using a special Heroku command. So Heroku and other hosting platforms, they don't use a .env file like we did here in development for all our config variables. Okay, so again, here in development, we use this config.env to put our environment variables. But here in Heroku, we will define them in a different way. But then in our code, everything that we have works exactly the same. Okay, so let's start with the node.env variable that we need to set to production. And so we do that by saying Heroku config :set and then the name of the variable node.env equal production. Okay, and actually this node.env variable is actually set by default to production by Heroku. But still, let's make 100% sure that it really stays this way even if Heroku changes something. Okay. So really to be sure, let's still do this, because as we know, a lot of our code actually depends on this variable. And it also can make Node applications run up to 3 times faster. I think we talked about that before, so the importance of setting node.env to production. But anyway, it's a good thing to do it here now actually. So just hit return, and it will then set this environment variable and restart the application. And so now all we need to do is to basically do this for all of the relevant environment variables. So we did node.env. Now the port, we will not set it because, as I mentioned before, Heroku will actually behind the scenes assign a random port to our application. Okay? And so next up, let's set the database. And actually, let's copy all of this. And then just paste it here. And that didn't really work. So let's try that with some quotes here maybe. Yeah, that looks much better. Next up, the database password. Let's clear it here. Next up, this secret. So just like this. And so this is a bit boring to do it for all of them. But, well, we only have to do it once. So it's not really a big deal. Okay. Now we also need this one here. Okay, because all of this here is just for mail trap. And we actually do not need that in production. Because remember that when we're in production, all our emails are actually sent using SendGrid and no longer using Mailtrap. And so in our Heroku application, we do not need these 4 variables. But we do need the email from. So that's our next one. Then we need the SendGrid username. As well as the password. And finally, our secret Stripe key. Okay. And with this, I think we have all our relevant variables set here. And so let's try again. Heroku open. And that looks perfect. Beautiful. So really our application is now deployed onto Radiant Springs or whatever you have in your case, and everything seems to be working beautifully. So all our images are here. Let's take a look at a single page here as well. And indeed, all of that works just beautifully. So our map also shows up. And yeah, it seems to work just fine. And the fact that all of this works just so seamlessly also shows the beauty of having a hosted database all the time, also during development. Because no matter if we're in development or in production, our database just keeps working. So if we had used a local database, then now we would have to export all the data from that local database, then create a hosted database and upload all the data onto that hosted database. And so that would, of course, create an extra step and some extra work. And again, with this, it just works. So that's a very nice developer experience right there. So let's see if we can also log in here, which should, of course, be possible with Laura at example 234. And it seems so. So, beautiful. And let's see if all our booked tours are still here. But why wouldn't they? And indeed, well, it's actually only one, but indeed, it is here. So, great. That's absolutely fantastic. And now let's just take a quick look into our Heroku dashboard. Okay. So here, let's open up Heroku, close these two. And so since we logged in previously here, this should automatically take us to the dashboard. And that dashboard will then show you by default all the applications that you have currently deployed. And so the one that we just deployed is this Radiant Springs here. So let's open that one up. Then here on the right side, you can see all the activity. For example, setting all these configuration variables that we just did. You have your resources, and many of this is only interesting if you have a paid dyno. And a dyno is really just the term that Heroku uses basically for a container in which your application runs. All right. So we have some metrics where we can see who is accessing the app. But once more, that only works if you have a hobby or a professional dyno. Okay. But what really matters here is the settings. And so here I wanted to show you that we can reveal the configuration variables. And so instead of changing or adding them in the command line, we could also do so right here. Okay, so these are all of them that we just added in the command line, right? Then another very important thing is up here in more, we can actually see our logs. Okay, so let's wait for it here. And so Heroku then gives you all of these loggings really for everything that happens in your application. So when we opened up the app in the browser, it requested all of these files, as you can see here, for example. All right. So really everything that's going on will be right here in this logs. And so if your app crashes or if something happens, and basically everything for which we used a console.log will then end up showing here in this logs. All right. And so these were the Heroku logs that I mentioned in one of the previous lectures. All right. Now, one thing that we can do is to actually change the name of our application. So instead of it being called like this random name, we can give it a more meaningful name. Now, we could do that here, but that would then kind of mess up our application in the terminal on our local computer. And so instead, what we do is to change the name directly here. So let's say Heroku apps rename like this, and then the new name for the application. And I will call it Naters, but you, of course, will then not be able to also call it Naters, because that subdomain will then already be taken. So you can then call it Naters with your name or with your username, or really any other word that you'd like, okay? So I will go ahead and now really call it Naters. Oh, but I see that someone already took that name from me. So that's unfortunate. But probably that's because I already used the name Naters in a project in another course. And so someone must have taken it, okay? So let's call it Naters app. And of course I need to then write everything else. So Heroku apps rename and then Naters app. So hopefully no one took this one. And it seems it's doing something. But someone has already taken that one as well. Well, that's really weird. So I guess I have a lot of students out there who post their apps to Heroku. So I will just follow the example that I gave earlier and will add my name here. So third try with Naters -Jonas. And so, yeah, let's hope that the third time it will work. So let's wait for it here. And that's it. So let's try Heroku open. All right, and here we go. And now at this point, the old version will actually no longer work. Okay, so this one is gone. Let's close it. Let's go back to the personal here. And so, yeah, here we go. That is Naters Jonas. Great. So our website is now officially in production. Now, another thing that I want to do here is to actually update the Postman environment variable for production. Remember that? So let's go ahead and copy this here. And also note how actually automatically we are on HTTPS here on Heroku. So Heroku does all the SSL certificate management for us behind the scenes so that our page is always secure, always with HTTPS. So that's another really nice feature of Heroku. So now here in Postman, let's go ahead and change this production and the URL. Of course, this one was just a placeholder. And instead, what we want is now our real production URL. And I'm not sure if it is correct like this. Let's just update and compare it with the development one. But indeed it is. So it needs to end with this /. Okay. And so the one that we just did does that as well. So let's update, close. And now all we need to do here is to change from development to this production Naters environment. And so now if, for example, I try to get all tours, which is actually the one that we had open, then let's see if that works. Let's turn all of this off. And indeed, it does. Great. Let's see if we can actually see the complete URL somewhere here. Well, it doesn't really show. But anyway, it doesn't really matter because we still know that it did actually work. So we now really got this data back here from our production API. And we can easily prove that because the development version is currently not even running. So if we send this, we get this error. Okay. So once more, really congratulations for almost now finishing the project at this point. It's already at a live server, and you can at this point share your project with the world and show everyone what you've accomplished after all of this work building this project. Just one more really small thing that I wanted to do here, as I said in the last lecture, is to test that compression. So let's just search for test gzip compression here. And then that should be this first result here, gift of speed. And so if we enter our URL here and then check, let's see, and we see gzip is enabled. And so that is because of that compression package that we used in the last lecture. So originally our page would have 14K, but then compressed it's 2K. And of course that doesn't make a big difference in this case, but for a much larger page, of course, it can really make a difference for your users. Perfect. Now in the next couple of videos, there's only a couple of small things that we still need to fix here, okay? And so we will do that over the next 2 or 3 lectures still. And so after that is when the project is really 100% finished.